I'm your huckleberry.
No other film genre is more responsible for the rise of Hollywood than the Western. I mean, Westerns have been a mainstay of Hollywood for well over 100 years now. There have been more movies made in this genre than any other in film history. But we don't get many Westerns anymore. I mean, we get a few, but not as many as there once were. And just like everything else in Hollywood, while there are many masterpieces in this genre, there are probably almost as many clunkers. Now, Kevin Costner has been a favorite of mine for many years. Field of Dreams is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. He won multiple Oscars for Dances with Wolves, and he has made many great movies over the course of his career. But he's also been in several high-profile flops. The Waterworld movie and The Postman come to mind, both of which are a bit overbloated and messy. Now, Costner's made some really great westerns. Silverado, it's a great movie. Dances with Wolves, great movie. Open Range might be one of my favorite westerns of all time. If you haven't seen it, you should. Now, according to Costner, he's had a story in his mind since the late 80s. An epic western that he wanted to tell in the form of at least 4 films. Well, life, the universe, and everything seemed to conspire against him. That is, until last year, when it was finally announced that the first 2 movies would come out in 2024, titled Horizons: An American Saga Part 1 and Part 2. And this past weekend gave us Part 1 of Costner's vision. So what do we have here? Is this another great Costner Western film? Or is it another overbloated disaster? Well, before we answer that, let's talk a little bit about the plot for the movie Horizons: An American Saga Part 1.
Let's talk.
So this is where I usually do my brief plot summary, but for this movie it's really difficult. So let's just give some basics. So the plot centers around some fictional characters and takes place in pre- and post-Civil War America, and it details the exploration of the American West. Depicting a 12-year span, the movie features an ensemble cast portraying various characters and their experiencing pioneering into new territory from their original homes. So let's start with what works in this film. The American West can be a great backdrop for movies, because if done right, you get these beautiful and rich landscapes, and we see that here. The cinematography is absolutely breathtaking. Some of your shots just really draw you in. Costner, who directed this, shows he has not lost his Dances with Wolves touch when it comes to filming epic westerns. Now, the film has a gigantic cast, but you get some really great acting, particularly from Costner, Sam Worthington, Will Patton, and
Michael Rooker, especially Patton and Rooker.
They're not on screen a ton, but when they are, they really dominate and own the scenes they are in. Also, the film doesn't shy away from the brutality of the Old West. It does not make it seem overly romantic. This must have been a really hard life for the people in it, and the film captures that.
I got that.
But man, this film has a lot of problems. Let's start with the main one. Notice my plot summary? I really didn't say much. Why? Because I honestly can't tell you exactly what the plot is. There are about 4 or 5 storylines in here. I think they're going to connect at some point. But in the 3 hours of watching this movie, they really don't begin to connect until the last 30 minutes, and even then I'm not sure. And while the acting is good, the cast is so large and so spread out, it's hard to keep track of who is who and what they are doing. Costner wrote this film, and while I praised his directing earlier, this is where I will criticize him. It seems like he had this large epic story in his head, but in attempting to get it on the paper and on the screen, he takes so much time setting things up that very little happens to move the story forward, especially in the first 45 minutes. And then when it finally does take off, it's great. But then it ends with this weird 5-minute montage of various scenes from our various characters in their various locations. Like, I don't know if it's a preview for the next movie or if this is something that's happening now. Listen, after 3 hours, I think I could tell where it's heading. I think all stories are going to converge on an area called Horizon, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure. And finally, my biggest criticism is about an hour into this film, I was struck with the thought that if Costner wanted to do an epic Western, this long story, told from various viewpoints from many characters in many parts of the Old West, would have made such a better television show than a film. If it was a TV show, he could have taken his time, set up his stories, fleshed everything out, especially with these characters. Could have moved the plot much better. Because this 3-hour movie feels like a setup for part 2. The problem is none of these stories are able to stand up on their own, much less as part of some visionary cinematic experience. Look, Costner doesn't lack for ambition here, as he sketches this frontier saga across the widest of canvases. But Horizon's first chapter proves too big in scope for it to satisfy as a self-contained film. We already know we're getting a part 2 in August, but I have a bad feeling about part 3 or part 4. I don't know if this is going to be successful enough to warrant those movies. And that would be a shame because the story looks like it might become interesting. So here's hoping that in part 2, Costner hits the ground running and really moves his saga of the American West and the blood-soaked romance of its conquering forward with more energy that this prologue sorely lacks. While it is a bit overbloated and messy, it's not a disaster. There's enough good stuff to recommend it. It's still a decent film if you're a fan of Westerns and a fan of Kevin Costner. You should probably check it out, or maybe just wait until part 2 comes out and then watch them back to back. I have a feeling that might be a better experience. Well, that's it for me this week. Tune in next week when I give you my thoughts and feelings on whatever I've seen. In the meantime, click that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, share this video with friends and enemies alike. And as always, thank you for giving me your valuable time, and I'll see you next week. Take care.